I'm James Strahan. I'm the president of the Arizona Architecture Foundation. I'm going to turn it over to Brandon in a second. He's the head of archive committee. We'll announce speakers, but I wanted to give you a 60-second introduction to the Arizona Architecture Foundation. We're a foundation that's 43 years old. We were originally established in 1983 as the Ostalato Architecture Foundation. There was another architecture foundation that was at the banks called the Sigmund Freud Architectural Foundation. About 3 years ago, we decided to merger the two foundations to create a new foundation called Arizona Architecture Foundation. The goal was to make it a statewide foundation, so we can do outreach for beginners all across the state. Our mission is very simple. We're out to support the advocacy of architectures in the state of Arizona, specifically the future of our profession, supporting young architects. And then the part that you're all here tonight is really preserving the legacy of Arizona architecture. About 12 years ago, maybe 14 years ago, we created the Arizona Archives Committee. And that committee was founded to save the important collection of Arizona architects. And to this date, we've saved about 20 architectural selections. We've been working with different institutions across the state to store the great pieces of work. Most of the collection is all 1985 older, hand drawn. So that's the focus of the archives committee. This is our 11th bid. So now that we're a statewide organization, we really wanted to reach out to U of A, Kaplan, so really start looking at what we do with the foundation to support all of the state. So super happy to see you here, so that we can start really bringing our mission down to Tucson and stuff. Thanks for having us. With that, I look for Brandon. Let's go.
Sure. Thanks, James. Just to give you the quick overview of the archives mission, I know James went through a lot of it already. But kind of going through what the actual work is. So we're both here in Southern Arizona, we're housing some archives here in the southern part of the state. I would be for an intercessor grabbing these collections and finding the permanent homes. Currently, we have a website for the Architecture Foundation, and on this website, we have a catalog to follow, the collections we have set safe, and even in these collections, we have started to call it volunteer development. We have descriptions and contents of these collections, and the locations of where they're at. This is ever evolving. As James mentioned, we have about 20 that we've helped place the last dozen or so years, and it just keeps growing. Also part of our mission, we give out grants on the archives side, along the foundation side. A lot of these grants go towards internships with helping process collections, archiving materials, anything that can support that mission of keeping the legacy. Another front we're doing is storage is a big thing. We are lucky to have that supply to us we can get there. So thank you. Up in Phoenix, it's a very great situation where there is no storage of any like risk. So for the last years, as part of our community outreach with the Historical Society, our goals as far as our archive mission, very much aligned with their part of statewide outreach with our Tucson, Tempe, and Flagstaff facilities. And just in the past year, we worked to get a program to expand, to do an expansion to the Tempe Heritage Center that will allow for private storage. And it's gotten a lot of good reviews with the legislature. Unfortunately, the state budgets aren't where they need to be, so we are high on the priority list, but we are not in the budget. So it's part to spearhead that speed that us even working with the trying to find private business to start doing private funding, fundraising, so we can kickstart designing. And stay tuned for more of that IP announced through any website now, social media, and also the Historical Society. As I mentioned, a lot of our outreach currently on social media, Instagram, and our website, which you can follow a lot of things we do. So I where you all and sign up with Instagram and check us out at the AC Arts Foundation. Getting into our thank yous. First, I'd like to thank the U of A, CAPLA, and Ryan here for allowing us the accommodation site. It's very gracious that helped us with that. Thank you. Secondly, I'd like to thank all our sponsors. The Arizona Architecture Foundation sponsored this event, that sponsored this year. All the proceeds that are raised tonight are going to specific to Southern Arizona Archive, part of the Archive School. Our VIP receptionist, Peter and Paul at the Sayas Foundation. Thank you, Paul, and members of the team. Our heritage sponsors are Arcadia, and I know I saw Brooke here earlier, so I didn't get to say hi, but thank you for being a long-time sponsor of the Archive Mission. Benjamin Supply, who I mentioned before, I saw Rudy earlier, and Jack, and they're providing the space here in Tucson for the tough collections we have down here, so thank you. And then Line of Space is another heritage sponsor. Thanks, Patricia. Our preservation sponsors are CCBG Architects, BWS Architects, 183 Steinhill, and Weddell Gilmore Architects. Thank you all. And then our archive sponsors, Historic Streetscapes. I know Ron Peters is a foundation and archive member. European Architecture Design Archive. This is McIndell, and they're very collaborative partner. They being captured, which is one of our archives, Jeffery, Tucson. It's Keller family and Adobe Health and Peace. Thank you all. And then lastly, at the Friends sponsorship level, we have to recommend architects and finance. So thank you. And before I pass the torch to Laura, I would like the committee members from the Archives Committee stand up and be recognized, along with Chris Evans and of course Jeffrey, who did immense amount of work in training this program committee tonight. So I think half of the stand, and also I think work you've done for the Archives Mission. You guys think you look good, obviously, so I couldn't do it. And with that, I think correction we have a subject a few remarks.
Hi, good evening. Can you all hear me? Because I don't have a very. There you go. Good. Good evening. I want to take a moment just to thank you all for being here tonight to support this fantastic cause. I'm standing before you tonight as the AIA Arizona Southern Arizona Chapter President, but also as a lover of history. In fact, in my CAPLA days, I did all the coursework for an architectural history minor, only to find out at the grad check that they don't give those to BArch majors, so oops. But no worries, I got my classical civilizations minor and we moved on. My history geek self is very happy still. I never regretted any moment of that study of history. It informs every day our timeline and where we are in history and what work we are doing moving forward. The Arizona Architecture Foundation is doing incredible work to preserve the architectural heritage of Arizona, including Southern Arizona. While physical buildings are the legacy of our architectural endeavors, the collections of the hand drawings are really the legacy of our process. A process that each of us carry forward. We evolve, we change, we grow, and we change every day. Preserving the history of Arizona's architectural process is a worthy cause, and these collections will serve as evidence of the creative minds that have shaped our environment. So thank you for being here tonight for your support, and I'll introduce Ryan Smith, who's the director of the School of Architecture.
Kind of feels like the previews at the movies. It's like, get on with it already. Thank you all for coming. Nancy Pollock-Elwin, the Dean of CAPLA, could not be here tonight. I'm the Director of the School of Architecture, Ryan Smith. Thank you for joining us here at the University of Arizona, CAPLA. That's where we just were, some of us at a reception. This is the CCP, the Center for Creative Photography. We often hold our lectures in this room. We welcome you. It's wonderful that we're here with the Arizona Architecture Foundation, who's so passionate about preserving the archives of great Arizona architects and their works, and we're pleased to be able to participate with this event tonight. I'm an educator, and it's essential for our students to learn from the past. We have a history sequence, and part of that involves mid-century architecture in Tucson. It's important to understand the context, craft, and contributions of those who really did shape the built environment here in Tucson and the rest of Arizona. Preservation allows us to teach legacy, culture, responsibility, and the unique heritage of our region. So I thank you and, of course, the Arizona Architecture Foundation and its members for work in this area. I want to thank Dino Sekeller, who connected us to this event, and he continues to be a strong supporter of the school and CAPLA. It's now my pleasure to introduce Brooks Jeffery. Brooks has dedicated his career to advancing heritage conservation as a vital part of environmental, cultural, and economic sustainability, not just here in Arizona, but around the world, from the Middle East to Latin America and to the American Southwest. At the University of Arizona at CAPLA, he wore many hats: Associate Dean, Director of the Drachman Institute, Chair of the Heritage Conservation Graduate Program, and Associate Vice President for Research, Infrastructure in the Office of Research, Innovation, and Impact, and most importantly, he was my former professor. He has served as a board member on the U of A Historic Preservation Advisory Committee, the Arizona Historic Sites Review Committee, and the National Council for Preservation Education. He also serves as the director on the Patronado San Javier, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation and restoration of the Mission San Javier del Bac. Join with me in welcoming Brooks Jeffery.
Good evening. It's so great to see so many people here that are here really to celebrate Art Brown. And so thank you all for coming here. It's my pleasure and honor to kind of MC tonight's program. As you'll know from the promotions, we've got sort of three parts to this program. One is that we're going to have a presentation by Chris Evans to talk about the kind of showcasing the life and the career of Art Brown. That's going to be followed by a video interview with Eddie Jones to sort of share his insights on Art Brown. And then the third component of this is going to be a panel discussion with three of my colleagues to really talk about what is that legacy that Art Brown still has today. And that's all to then say, if you have questions, please save them to the end, because we're going to be having a Q&A session right at the end. So please feel free to kind of bottle up your questions, and then hopefully we'll be able to engage then with all the panelists for some of the questions that you might have. But before I introduce tonight's keynote presentation, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge some very special guests. Gordon Brown is here tonight, along with his wife, Fran. Can you raise your hands? Oh, there they are, right there. Gordon, of course, is the son of Art Brown and his partner, starting with the firm in 1970, I believe. And their son, Jeff, Art Brown's grandson, is also here too. He's the one with proudly wearing the U of A shirt that's going around. I'm also very pleased and very proud to announce and use tonight's event to announce the donation of the Art Brown Architectural Drawings Collection to the Arizona Architectural Foundation. This has been a long road. Some of you who have been involved with it know that we've been working very hard to bring the Art Brown and Gordon Brown's drawings into the archives, and we really appreciate the Arizona Architectural Foundation for stepping up and acting as a recipient of these drawings, to hold them. And our ultimate goal is to be able to transfer them to the U of A's, University of Arizona's special collections, where there are housed many of the other architects of Southern Arizona: Roy Place, Josias Jostler, Judith Chafee, some of the other great architects in Southern Arizona. I also want to thank the Arizona Architectural Foundation for their advocacy and support of this donation, and to my colleagues Chris Evans and Dino Sekeller for really doing literally the heavy lifting, bringing the drawings to the Benjamin supply place and making it happen. Our goal is to begin the processing of processing the collections and then working on using the collection then for education and research then as we move forward. So really appreciate that. So now it's my turn to introduce someone else. So your introductions continue. My colleague and my friend Chris Evans, who will be tonight's keynote presentation speaker. I've had the pleasure of knowing Chris as a friend and colleague for about 20 years. He has been a strong advocate of Tucson's modern 20th century modern architecture, including being the co-founder and past president of the Modern Architecture Preservation Project, MAP, of Tucson. And it was a pleasure to work with him on that, as well as the number of context studies that really brought attention to modern architecture. Tucson's use of the moniker of the old Pueblo really sort of dampened our ability to really advocate for modern architecture and really bring it into the forefront. And it's organizations like MAP Tucson and some of the context studies that were able to kind of raise awareness about the importance and the legacy of modern architecture in Tucson. But also, he is an architect. So in addition to all of these context studies, he's been able to practice in the renovation of more than a dozen historic properties. So Chris not only preaches, he practices what he preaches. And so with that, please join me in welcoming Chris Evans.
Okay, I'm already tired. I don't know about you guys. Well, thank you. I wanted to mention a couple of things before we get started. One of the things, since we have access now to the drawings from the archives, I've tried to include some of that material in the presentation tonight, so you get an opportunity to see some things you haven't seen before. Sorry. Thanks for letting me know. And the other thing, we're trying to cover a lot of ground. Art Brown was prolific, and his career was extensive, and so I'm going to move, and try to move through a lot of material, but we can only get a snapshot of his work and his legacy here, but we'll do the best that we can here. Okay, so in preparing for this evening, I spoke to someone who grew up in a house that Arthur Brown originally designed for his parents in the late 1950s. I asked if he knew why they had hired Brown. He indicated that Brown was the guy at the time. His parents went to look at several houses Brown had designed, and they didn't like any of them. He asked his father why they hired him, and his father responded, "Everybody who lived in them loved them." And as it turns out, his parents loved the house he designed for them too. I tell that story because it speaks to how client-focused Arthur Brown's work was. And it will be a common thread, I think, in the work you see tonight. So I want to start off by offering some perspective on Arthur Brown's significance, especially because we are now so far removed from his era, and time has not always been kind to his work and his legacy. Hopefully we can repair that a little bit tonight. Brown became partners with Richard Morris in 1939, and one of the first significant houses they designed as partners was the house for the Anderson family. Andreas Anderson was a professor at the School of Art at the University of Arizona, and obviously with that background you might anticipate that he was open to doing something unusual or different. But I wanted to show you this house primarily because it was published in 1940, just a year later, in this book, The Modern House in America. What is extraordinary is the significance of this book in disseminating ideas of modern housing to the American public, and the company Brown and Morse share in these pages. Every major architect shaping modern spaces in the United States at that time everyone not named Frank Lloyd Wright, is included here. Turn the page, and there are houses by Richard Neutra, Rudolf Schindler, Gregory Ain, Albert Frey, all of the major Californians, Walter Gropius, Marcel Breuer, Alden Dow, Keck and Keck. Mind you, this is Brown's first published work as a principal in the firm. James Ford and Catherine Morrow Ford, the editors of the book, were housing advocates, and they were really coming from a somewhat different place. They were concerned about the quality of housing in the country. And they embraced modernism, at least in part, to combat the poor quality of housing in the early 20th century. And they saw the air and the light and the open space as a potential antidote to the problems of poor housing conditions in the country. And they also saw the simplicity of modern design as an asset in that effort because of the cost efficiency. And I think this house was of particular interest to them because the house was very small and cost efficient in comparison to many of the houses in the book. That idea of efficiency will be a theme that we'll come to again tonight. I'm actually realizing I should probably turn the lights down. Is that good? Okay. Sorry about that. And I think, as I said, I think this house was of particular interest to them because the house is very small and cost efficient in comparison to many of the houses in the book. So, in contrast to this house is the residence for Margaret, Countess of Suffolk, which was also published in the book and was designed during the time that Brown worked for Morse's office in 1936 and was one of the first projects, if not the first project, he worked on with Morse. It was also one of the first examples of modern architecture in Tucson. So how else can we put Brown into perspective? After the war, Brown was out on his own. In 1947, he received a Progressive Architecture Award for this house, the Rosenberg residence. And in 1948, this house, the Clothier residence, graced the cover of Architectural Record magazine, and it won a National AIA award in 1949. In that same year, his work crossed into the broader cultural sphere when it was published in Time magazine. His first Christian church was featured in an article on emerging religious architecture in the post-war era, alongside the works of architects such as Saarinen and Bruce Goff. And his images there are on the upper left corner. In 1950, his Tucson Biltmore was again featured on the cover of Architectural Record magazine. And in 1952, this photo of Brown's Faith Lutheran Church was used by the editors of Progressive Architecture magazine as the cover photo for their greeting card. In 1955, he was again featured in Time magazine. This time, his Faith Lutheran Church was featured in an article that explored the expanding role of modern architecture in American churches. And you can see that building again in the upper right-hand corner. Arthur Brown was, in fact, Tucson's first architectural superstar. Between 1940 and 1960, his work was published more than 30 times in the major architectural periodicals and more than 25 times in popular magazines such as Better Homes and Gardens. In 1961, Brown was the first architect from the state of Arizona inducted into the American Institute of Architects College of Fellows. And in 1986, he received the AIA Western Mountain Region's Silver Medal, the highest honor in the 8-state region. But some of Brown's achievements were not fully recognized in a timely fashion. I want to jump ahead 25 years or so to 2013, 20 years after Brown had passed away, and more than 70 years after the publication of The Modern House in America. While Brown was recognized for his work designing in response to the solar intensity of the Sonoran Desert, he did not really receive significant national recognition for his body of work until this book, The Solar House, Pioneers of Solar Design, was published. And after the work of George Fred Keck, Brown is discussed as perhaps the second leading innovator of solar design of the early modern period. So that gives you an idea of the significance of Brown's work and how it has been recognized. So now I'd like to try and give you a sense of why his work is significant. So a little background on Brown. He was born in 1900 in Tarkio, Missouri. His father taught at a small local Presbyterian college where Brown received a degree in chemistry. He received an architectural degree from Ohio State in 1927, and he married his wife Carolyn in that same year. Brown worked in Chicago for several years, but struggled to maintain employment during the Great Depression. He eventually came to Arizona in 1935, looking for better opportunities. He joined Morse's office in Tucson in 1936. In the wake of the Great Depression and World War II, Brown was designing within a context of great change, changes in the way we live and work and in the way we build. His willingness to embrace that change and his ability to apply his own innovative thinking was central to his success. Brown's work was largely responsible for introducing modern architecture to Tucson. His most influential works come in the mid-1940s through the early 60s, although he continued to work with his son Gordon into the early 80s. Arthur Brown is first and foremost a problem solver. Brown's design concepts were almost always focused on solving a functional problem or meeting the needs of a client first, rather than achieving an aesthetic goal. The character of the architectures typically arose out of the solution. This is distinguishable from other architects, such as Frank Lloyd Wright, who are more likely to explore and be driven by the artistic end of the architectural spectrum. Brown believed in designing without style when possible. As a result, and I think you'll get a sense of this tonight, there is a wide range of architectural expression in Brown's work. So there are several themes that carry through his work that I want to share with you tonight. First, much of Brown's early work emphasized the utilitarian nature of architecture. Utility and cost efficiency were often the driving force for his design. This ethic arose in part out of Brown's experience of providing for a family during the Depression. It was also probably the result of his clients in the early post-war years, when Tucson was still a young town with little established wealth in the area. So a utilitarian modern architecture was a reasonable response to the needs of a growing city. The result was an almost minimal architecture free from extraneous embellishment. Brown was also a pioneer in passive solar design. Fundamentally, he was trying to figure out how to build modern buildings with extensive glazing in a severe desert climate. He was also trying to understand how to facilitate indoor-outdoor living in a climate that fostered that for a good portion of the year. The passive solar concepts that are standard in the curriculum of architecture schools, Brown was conceiving and developing in the 1930s and 1940s. He was solving the forms of passive solar design, and his work was providing the early skeleton framework for the forms of buildings to come. Brown was also consistently at the forefront of new construction technologies in Tucson in the 1940s and 50s. Today, we might call him an early adopter. While he was often quick to embrace new technologies, what is particularly remarkable is that he innovates on how to use those technologies. To quote from Brown's monograph, he was able to experience the curiosities of an advancing industrial age and to use that curiosity as a springboard for his own inventiveness. Similarly, Brown was consistently rethinking convention, particularly in residential design. Brown was embracing and articulating the new informality of modern living that was emerging in the post-war era. Preconceptions about what a house is or should be were set aside, and that gave him a broader canvas to conceive targeted solutions for his clients. And then finally, weaving throughout all of these themes in his work is the concept of innovation. Whether in his solar work, structural concepts, living concepts, Brown was doing things that hadn't been done before. In his exploration of new ideas, Brown's work demonstrates a consistent pattern of experimentation and refinement, likely a byproduct of the scientific method that would have been central to his background in chemistry. Much of that innovation was pushing the boundaries of the architectural profession. Architects are typically trained in the design of static systems. Brown was often looking to create dynamic or deployable systems and crossing over into engineering. So I'm going to kind of go through a number of projects here, and sort of using these themes as an organizational tool. But what you're going to find is these themes are not exclusive to any individual projects. They are, there's often 2 and 3 of those themes in any one project. So in Brown's early work, there's a recognition and evolving understanding of the importance of passive solar design for modern buildings, particularly with significant glass exposure. He indicated that his interest in passive solar design was largely a response to the economic conditions of the 1930s. Ironically, as Brown noted, the cost of energy in the immediate post-war era was so low that his concepts had limited impact on energy costs for his clients. His efforts were decades ahead of national trends to develop energy savings in modern buildings. But Brown also recognized the value of the improved comfort that came with good solar design. So as early as the Anderson residence in 1939, Brown is discussing building orientation and the need to limit glazing on east and west exposures and extending the eaves to reduce solar heat gain. But he doesn't yet quite have a clear picture of the value of eaves on the north and south. During the war, there was a more significant moratorium on construction, and Brown had a lot of time to explore ideas about what housing could be like in the post-war era. In his work, there was a move towards informality, cost efficiency, and also towards energy efficiency. In particular, what comes in these experiments is an elongated floor plan. If light and views are to be a primary focus, then extensive surface area facing north and south is ideal. He typically couples this with single-loaded corridors to allow for better cross-ventilation. So this is the wood residence, and here the south masonry wall was painted a dark color so that when the sun would hit it in the wintertime, it would absorb additional heat than it would otherwise. And then the eaves shade the wall in the summertime so that the wall does not get direct sunlight and doesn't absorb that heat in the same way. So I love this little house. This is and it's incredibly efficient layout. Brown was clearly thinking about low-cost housing being a priority in the post-war world. The high windows on the front elevation become a theme in his work. It's an emphasis on privacy from the street. He also extends the vertical walls at either ends of the house to reduce low-angle sunlight from entering the windows on the north elevation in the summer. Unfortunately, the carport here has been filled in. That's where the sliding glass door is. One of the innovations seen here is Brown's separation of ventilation from view. Brown utilizes the space between the roof joists up here for ventilation. This use of vents within the joist space eliminated the need for screens within the window spaces, which obviously improved the views. The use of air vents detached from the windows is something of a signature of Brown's work in this era. So this is the Rosenberg house is one of a series of houses that Brown designed in the 1940s, and it's organized around a linear floor plan, and it allows for the implementation of his passive solar concepts. This house emphasizes privacy from the street again with the clear-story ribbon windows on the front elevation. It also has a shed roof that is sloped upward toward the south. The linear floor plan maximizes the surface area on the north and south elevations where you could better control seasonal solar exposure with eaves and limited the exposure on the east and west. A large window wall along the entire southern facade allows significant winter sunlight to penetrate the house where the heat is absorbed by the thermal mass of the concrete floors, and an interior masonry wall, which Brown referred to as the solar wall. And that's this wall here. The wall was painted a dark color to improve heat absorption and would re-radiate heat back into the space at night. I should note that there was a Frenchman by the name of Felix Trom who patented a concept of a mass wall behind a south-facing glass. as a passive storage device. And he did that in the 1960s, some 20 years after Brown is doing this work. And again, if you look up closely, there are these vents at the top. So there are no vents within the window wall itself. So the Hirsch residence is a refinement of the solar wall concept. And here, Brown has, again, the solar wall along the hallway here. But what he's done is he's battered the wall at the base so that the wall is more perpendicular to the direct sunlight coming in through the windows. And so it's better able to absorb the sunlight. So this is the Rose Elementary School, and it was the first solar heated public building in the country. However, the system for heating the classrooms is totally unrelated to any of his solar houses. What Brown did, Brown used layered aluminum roof pans to create an airspace within the roof. And that airspace was heated by the sunlight striking the roof surface. Fans would draw the air up to the peak of the roof, where the air was then redirected into the classrooms. This preheated the air moving into the furnace, which was only used when needed. The system functioned for 10 years until an addition was built, and estimates were that the system reduced heating costs by more than 80%. This system worked well in part because school occupancy paralleled daylight. There was no occupancy at night, and there was less demand for heating during the daytime. So this is the Ball-Paylore House, certainly one of his most famous projects. The house is characterized by movable corrugated aluminum sunshades that rotate on a track along the perimeter of the rear yard patio. They provide shade for the patio and the glass enclosed interiors. The mobile structures are still functional 70 years later. The interior spaces are contained within a hexagonal plan anchored by a central fireplace, and the unique geometry is carried through the entire interior design. Another item of note here is the carport on the front of the house. Here he's totally. This is essentially the what the house looks like from the street. He's sort of, the idea of pretense is gone in terms of the front of the house. So First Christian Church was one of the first large-scale examples of modern architecture in Tucson. Brown integrated a traditional axial church and cloister plan, including a courtyard, bell tower, and a gable roof, with the minimalist simplicity of the newly emerging modern aesthetic. The serrated sidewalls of the sanctuary funneled daylight into the sanctuary space through vertical slot windows. On the interior, the vertical steel fins of the serrated sidewalls also screen the side aisles from view from the congregation, so that latecomers can enter with less impact on the service. One interesting note on the exterior: a mortar wash was originally applied over the brick to create a more uniform surface and to de-emphasize the traditional construction material, and perhaps to reduce solar heat gain through the brick. But the mortar wash has faded over time, revealing the layered expression of brick and concrete lintels over the doors and then the bell tower. So this is the only color photo or the earliest color photo I can find, but it shows you that the mortar wash really created a much more uniform surface to the building and has a very different character in that time frame. The Grand Greenlee Residence Hall on the U of A campus is an exceptional example of the utilitarian aesthetic in the tradition of the early European modernists. The facility is composed of simple rectangular volumes, ribbon windows, brick, and concrete. Planar roof extensions shade the upper windows. Aluminum awnings originally provided shade for windows on the lower floors, but have since been removed. The red brick construction ties the facility to the material traditions of the university campus. The strength of the design is really the planning around a sunken central courtyard, which functions as a common entry and a primary social gathering space. As a student who lived here for a few years, I can tell you that it was very successful in that regard. So Brown indicated that the Goldsmith House was one of the first houses in Tucson to have sliding glass doors. But Brown took it a step further by creating a multi-panel window wall that opened into a pocket in the wall. This created a 20-foot opening in the room, between the living room and the screen porch. So Faith Lutheran Church. This is a really radical design in 1951. The strong geometric forms have been referred to as a stairway to heaven, and the tower has been referred to as praying hands. But most commonly, the tower has been referred to as rabbit ears, which apparently, as I've been told, Art Brown came to embrace that moniker. From the original concept drawing, you can see that the building was originally intended to be symmetrical around the bell tower. Building was one of the earliest uses of precast concrete construction in Tucson. The roof is composed of overlapping hollow core concrete planks over a steel A-frame supports. The structural components are left exposed on the interior, as you can see here, and provide the primary character for the sanctuary space. Prefabrication was critical here to minimizing the cost of construction to meet a very limited budget. Creating an overlapping relationship with the concrete planks was a particular innovation in an emerging technology. The concrete construction and unusual geometry were unprecedented in Tucson at the time and predated similar trends in modern architecture locally by nearly a decade. So Brown liked to tell this story to his fellow architects. He got a call that there was a leak at the church, and so he went there, and he found that the leak was dripping directly onto one of the altars, and where a Bible laid open. And Brown claimed that the Bible was open to a passage on the Great Flood, which of course suggested that the leak was somehow divinely sanctioned. So Brown was hired by the Arizona Automobile Association to design a new headquarters building. And that building is located on what's now Drockman Road, but was really part of Miracle Mile's very lively architecture. This is the Tucson Inn, which was across the street, but this was lined with neon signs and very lively architecture. So the roadside architecture here, he needed something to compete with that. So he did this. The building is characterized by a folded plate plywood roof in a radial form. This was one of the earliest examples of folded plate construction in Tucson. It is also one of the earliest efforts to define architecture using a repetitive pattern as the dominant character of the building. He is embracing the new technology, but with the radial pattern, he is also deploying it in a novel way. I'll tell you, I came across at least 2 articles that talked about this concept of stress skin folded plate systems, And both of those articles have photos of this building as a reference point for this idea of the radial pattern. I don't know if it wasn't the first, because Brown actually did another one of these at the Tucson airport that's since been demolished. But it's certainly one of the earliest. The roof, by the way, was installed in a single day. I just wanted to show you this image to give you a sense. The folded plate, the thickness of these panels is only about 3 inches. And out of the archives, we came across this great photograph of the interior. So the use of hyperbolic paraboloid geometric forms to strengthen thin shell concrete construction was relatively new in the 1950s. Brown was apparently the first to recognize that the straight lines that were used to generate the curvature of hyperbolic geometry could be simulated using corrugated metal. The corrugations in the metal sheets mirrored the straight lines in the form. He tested the concept on this carport shelter at his office. Note that if you look here, you'll note that the corrugation lines are actually running in opposite directions on the top from the bottom. There's actually 2 layers of corrugated metal running perpendicular to each other, and that's what gives the system its strength. So the 2 layers are fastened together. The story is that the building inspector came and decided to get up on top of the building and walk out to each point because he wasn't quite sure that it would actually stand up. Brown actually patented this concept, although it did not see widespread use. But he did apply it soon after at the McInnes house. This aluminum glass pavilion that encloses the primary living spaces of this house is also covered by a hyperbolic paraboloid roof. The primary living spaces, this roof is built with 2 layers of corrugated aluminum, sandwiching panels of rigid insulation. The house was envisioned as a glass pavilion in a park-like setting. The lush landscaping helps to provide privacy from the street and defines the primary experience of the interior. So I love this drawing. You can probably tell from Brown's watercolor concept sketch that this house was designed around a central courtyard, although no palm trees were ever planted. The owners wanted a home that facilitated indoor-outdoor living and extensive entertaining. The original intention was to dissolve the distinction between interior and exterior and have the courtyard become integral to daily living. The living spaces opened onto the central courtyard, which provided the primary access between the public spaces on the right and the private spaces on the left. The entry sequence here is particularly striking. You enter through a sliding glass door that is part of a 30-foot glass wall. The sliding glass door entry doors open into the central courtyard, which is really the heart of the home. The entry was composed of glass to create a more open feeling in the patio and to take advantage of the mountain views from the courtyard space. So Brown is challenging convention by reconceiving the concept of entry. Here it is incidental to modern living. And he is also reconceiving daily living, indoor-outdoor living taken to another level. According to the owners, this house felt like it was the Jetsons' house, at least early on, in the years before some of the cutting-edge technology started to fail. It had radiant heated floors, which Brown used quite a bit, actually, at that time frame. And the radiant heated floors actually included radiant heat in the courtyard. It also had an all-in-one washer-dryer, an automatic pool cover, and it eventually had a retractable screen over the courtyard to deal with the heat gain in the summer. The heated floors apparently worked so well that the owners noted that their infant son was sweating in his crib because the crib was so close to the floor. So I want to show you a couple of projects here that are really just unusual and fun and different, and I was not really familiar with these, and I think they're really start to speak to how innovative his thinking was. So this building was actually demolished some 40 years ago, but I wanted to share it with you because, like the Ball-Paylore House, it also had a deployable roof structure, although albeit much less well known and much more ambitious. You can see the two yellow triangles that appear to be on the roof in this sketch, but in fact these represent a pair of folding roof structures that provided cover for a V-shaped terrace on the backside of the building. Both of these structures folded up like a bat wing against the building and were electronically controlled. So you can see there were the roof cover was in 4 segments, and each pair of segments on either side folded up against the building on either side. So unfortunately, this is the best photo I've been able to find of this, but you can kind of get a sense of it here as it's sort of halfway folded up and not laid all the way down. And this is just one side of it, right? You can't see the other side. These bat wings were less about solar control, although they did provide shade. The use of corrugated translucent material coupled with a radiant floor heating system suggests that this was more about addressing inclement weather and extending the functionality of the outdoor event space into the evening hours. And there's some of the detailing on this is really interesting. This is a very unusual and fun project, and one of the best examples of Brown thinking outside the box. Patio Pantry was a drive-in grocery concept, and according to a newspaper ad, Brown had a role in conceiving how it would work. You can see he's mentioned here at the beginning of this advertisement. The groceries were displayed along the walls so that the items were visible from the exterior of the building, but I think the more common scenario probably was that you would provide a list to the clerk, or you would call in an order ahead of time. Of course, today we would order online. But the main reason I wanted to share this project with you is that Brown designed the building to have flexible rubber tubes that would drop down from the ceiling to provide evaporative cooling into your car while you waited for your groceries. Keep in mind that this is in an era where there is not widespread use of air conditioning in automobiles yet. Unfortunately, I don't have any photos of those tubes. We do have a drawing here that shows it, and basically the system was set up so that there was a counterbalance inside the shop, and the employees could release that counterbalance to release the tube down to the car so that people could bring it into their window. Just show a couple other quick things here of this sort of outside the box thinking. Here's something that Brown, I believe, patented, or certainly thought about patenting. Here he was taking a door jamb and creating a way to get access into the wall through the door jamb. It basically has a removable panel that would allow you to access the metal studs behind it, or concrete masonry, and that way you could run wiring from that space. And this project here, the Sun's Veterans Housing, I just wanted to mention this because he was hired and asked to design a single floor plan for 100 houses. And what he did instead was he designed a single floor plan that could be rotated in every direction so that any one of the 4 elevations could be presented to the street. And then by mirroring the plan, there were 8 different variations on how this plan could present itself to the street. So lastly, I just want to run through a few projects to give you kind of a range of the architectural expression in Brown's work. There are two remarkable aspects of this house. First is the unique carport form that provides the primary character of the house from the street. The entry is within the carport and through a translucent glass door. But second is the intricate detailing that arises in the intersection of the wood rafters and the angled northeast-facing window wall. So the Congdon House is one of my favorite houses. It has a regional modern ranch quality that is really reinforced primarily by the use of materials, mortar wash burnt adobe, board and batten sheathing, and rough sawn timber construction. The indoor-outdoor relationship is reinforced by the adobe walls that extend outward into the landscape and the use of board and batten on the interior of the house, which was certainly unusual. What is of particular interest is the lapped 2x12 roof decking, which is reminiscent of the lapped concrete planks that we saw in Faith Lutheran Church. And it was actually a regular refrain in Brown's work. He did this kind of thing a lot. I just think the texture here is really wonderful. So this Christ Methodist Church chapel is sheltered beneath a three-circle umbrella, which was representative of the Holy Trinity. It's a little deceiving in that this front circle is actually a fourth circle. It's an entry circle. So the actual chapel itself is covered by the three circles, but this one at the front entry is separate. And unfortunately, I don't have a great photo of the interior, but this is what I do have. At least gives you a sense of the space. It's a small space. If you look closely, this charcoal drawing of Brown's kind of speaks for itself. If you look in the background, there's a plane on a landing strip, and of course, it looks like there's a plane on the roof there. The owner was an avid pilot who had property near Tubac that was adjacent to a small airstrip, and he wanted a house where he could also house his plane. Brown was clearly thinking about what the house would look like from the air, in particular the hangar that had an aerial profile of a jet. If you look at the point of the jet roof there, you can see it also here in this photograph, extending out over the swimming pool in the courtyard. So the great room of this house is shaped not unlike the bow of a ship, and is encased in floor-to-ceiling glass on both sides and provides panoramic views of the city lights. The dramatic upward-sloping roof is constructed of massive glue-laminated wood beams supported by slender steel columns. And finally, I wanted to share this school on the Tohono O'odham Reservation to give a true sense of the range of architectural expression in Brown's work. This is obviously quite a bit different than much of what we have been looking at. But again, this is Brown's work, Brown and Art and Gordon both. And finally, I wanted to, in the tradition of the Academy Awards, I wanted to do a little memorial service for some of the buildings we've lost. But Brown has been, some of his best work, unfortunately, has gone away. So I thought we'd just run through quickly and take a look at some of those. This studio, the Messner studio, to me, I love this building, and I think it's a shame that it disappeared. It, it's really kind of a sophisticated renovation and two-story addition to what was originally a smaller Sonoran adobe structure from the 19th century. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. I think we now know that Chris is probably the foremost expert on Arthur Brown's work, and we're very honored to have him present tonight. So let's give him another round of applause. It's now my pleasure to do a video interview with Eddie Jones. And let's see here. And as a bit of an introduction, I just wanted to let you know that the interview was a reach out to Eddie Jones because I invited him to come down and be part of our panel tonight. He wasn't able to make it, but I knew he was a big fan of Art Brown. He's always sort of referencing Art Brown, and I knew that it was an important sort of milestone or sort of touchstone for him. And so, and I knew also that Eddie had a chance to meet with Art Brown early in Eddie's career when he first arrived to Arizona. And that's what he talks about in this video. And of course, Eddie being Eddie, he has lots of stories to tell. And so, so we have a little video clip of an interview that I did as a result of that.
Eddie, thank you very much for joining us today. And this video is going to be shared as part of a celebration of Art Brown's work and his legacy. And I really appreciate you joining us and sharing your insights and your love for Art Brown. I'd like to start with just a
My pleasure.
I'd like to start with a couple of questions. First, how were you introduced to Art Brown, or how were you introduced to his work?
Well, there was this wonderful historian at the School of Architecture at ASU who wrote, from time to time, he would ask different people in the Phoenix area to do interviews, or he would research projects and he would publish them in this journal called Triglyph. It hasn't been around for decades, but it was, I still have a copy, and it's an honor, to have been included in there as one of the interviewers. We've got Max Underwood interviewing Paolo Soleri. We've got Marcus interviewing Paul Schweiker, and Wendell Burnett discussing life in the, Soleri's dome in the desert. It's really good stuff. And but anyway, Marcus, and this is back in 1989. This is the last century before this one. And he asked me if I knew Arthur T. Brown. I had to admit I didn't, but I was pretty new to the state. And so he sent me down to Tucson to interview Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown was in his 90s, and but very spry. He took the time to take me around Tucson and personally show me some of his projects, which, as you would know, are very impressive, far ahead of their time. And, the thing that I liked about Arthur, I think the most was his, humbleness. I mean, he didn't know, nor did he care that he was ahead of his time. He just did the logical thing, the pragmatic thing, and he did it beautifully. And probably wasn't even sure why he was being interviewed, And his son was still in the office. Uh, I still remember this. I must have been in my probably late 20s, early 30s, and Arthur Brown's son was 54. To me, that was ancient. And here, I'm talking to his dad, and I remember the drafting board seeing a parallel bar buried, under stacks of research material and old plans, et cetera. It was a wonderful day for a young, aspiring architect. It was almost like being mentored by this very experienced and well-respected architect named Arthur T. Brown.
Yeah, no, no. So you met Arthur Brown. How did that interview and your engagement with Arthur Brown sort of influence your work? And, whether it's his personality or his design principles. And if you could maybe give some examples of how that might be, how his work was influential on yours.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question, and I'm glad you asked. Still in my early 30s, I was, impressionable. And, as you yourself would have it, we have our heroes. And there are certain common denominators among our heroes. And Arthur Brown, held those same kind of qualities that I admired and, more national reputation, so to speak. But that day that I spent with him, to see how he approached projects from a very pragmatic standpoint. He could explain his projects in terms that were logical and defensible, and it almost made the solutions obvious because he was so clear on what his goals would be, and they varied, from whether it was a residential project, a religious building, or a medical facility. But each one of those examples I just talked about were, clear ideas executed in an economical manner. And because there was so much integrity in his design decisions and material choices, they were inherently beautiful. And when you can, sit in your backyard in Tucson in the summer and grab the column of your shade structure and pull it so that the shade structure follows the arc of the afternoon sun, so you're still in shade, I mean, that's pretty remarkable. And you didn't find that at Home Depot. They weren't even invented yet. You had to invent it. So to see that it was possible for not only for an architect to imagine a solution, but an architect could actually implement the solution, have it fabricated, custom fabricated. That customization, is sort of a revelation to me. And that was a lesson. And the other lesson would be to look at architecture in very practical terms. That gives them strength, as opposed to, one could argue, weakens them. But the one thing that I like the best, and by God, I have continued to do it, is you don't take no for an answer, and especially from bureaucrats. And if you read that article or that interview, there was a time when he needed a building permit, but he was denied the permit because there weren't enough customers to, for the gas company to justify, running one gas line to one new house. So at night, Mr. Brown, pounded copper pipes in every one of the empty lots so that it looked like they were stubbed up for gas, and he got his gas. He got his permit for gas. And, is that cheating? Well, sure, but it's well-intended cheating. And so I do that all the time, probably a lot more with more militancy than Arthur Brown did. But to me, it was like a permission slip to bypass the system when necessary.
That's great. Do you think any of your work was, I know that, you embrace the sort of principles of solar orientation and an honest
Yeah.
expression of materiality, all the things that are characteristic of Art Brown's work. Are there other things that you think
Mhm.
are sort of directly tied to some of the work and principles that you apply?
I can think of one important one in particular, and that is that to test each design decision with whether it fulfills at least two jobs. Now, the fundamental two jobs that every design decision has to fulfill are, is it functional and is it beautiful? If it's only beautiful, it's not good enough. If it only functions, it's not good enough. It has to do those both things. But in addition to that, if it can do even more jobs, that again reinforces the central idea. I'll never forget it's gone now, but Arthur Brown did a hospital
Tucson General
south of
Hospital.
Speedway somewhere.
Yep.
And there was this beautiful gold anodized aluminum, triangulated sunshade that protected the south side of the building, filtering the south sun into the hospital rooms. Okay, well it was functional and it was beautiful. It gave the building an identity. But he went beyond that, and at every intersection of the framing, he put a light fixture. So not only was it filtering sunlight, but it became an electric lighting element in the evening. And it fully integrated a complete result of the system, again, that he invented and had fabricated for that very large building. So I love it when if a student says, "Why did you do that, Eddie?" And I start speaking to them in those terms. Well, this is the functional part. I'll let you decide whether it's beautiful. But in addition to stabilizing my building laterally, it's also acting as an acoustical baffle, and it's a daylighting diffuser, the things like that. I'm thinking of my own studio building and the ceiling that's so distinctive. I gave a tour just the other day, and that ceiling did five things. It was a structural decision. It was an electric lighting decision, a daylighting diffuser decision, an acoustical decision, and a finish. So I think that more than amortizes the investment, so to speak.
Yeah, no, and I was reading the Triglyph article again, and one of the other functions of that screen was to act as a scaffolding for the window cleaning.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it served multiple
Forget that.
functions for multiple different groups that engage with the building.
Yeah. And if you're a client, I would think that would make one feel very good about the investment, that it
Yep.
was multifunctional.
Yep.
But in the end, the public doesn't know any of that, right? All they see is this new piece of architecture that sits in the community and makes it better because it's interesting and captivating and therefore beautiful.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, so many of Art Brown's buildings have now been demolished, including that Tucson General Hospital. And
Yeah.
do you have any insights as to why that is, or if there's a lasting legacy for Art Brown's buildings? How do we preserve that to make sure that contemporary audiences understand that legacy?
Well, Brooks, you're asking a very large question, and there's a sort of a big picture. For so many decades, we, meaning the communities, were okay with tearing down perfectly good buildings and replacing them with new buildings. Unfortunately, it was very rare that the new building was as good or better than the old building that was destroyed. But I think, I don't know, I sense a growing, regard for the value of the built environment. I would even say this, there are no bad buildings. All of them have potential if they're in the right hands in terms of repurposing. So, in modernizing and remodeling, whatever you want to call it, they all have potential. And personally, if I never did another new building, I would be happy. Fortunately, I don't have to test that, declaration, but and it's not just Arthur T. Brown buildings. I mean, I'm so frustrated. My buildings are getting torn down. With all of the crappy buildings around, why do you choose the architecture to tear down first? I know it's not really true, but it feels like it's true that the architecture is the most vulnerable as opposed to an ordinary nondescript building. And and there are sort of two levels of destruction, right? There's when the hospital was completely destroyed. I think maybe the sunscreen was salvaged. I seem to remember reading something about that, which is a good thing. But take the beautiful church on Speedway, the Christian church. If you squint, you could think Louis Kahn did it. That's a bold statement, but it's not good. But then the priest or the pastor wants to enclose the courtyard to secure it. He told me that, and I go, well, it's possible to do that, but you have to be sensitive to what is already here. Take the cues from the palette that Mr. Brown had established already. Oh, sure, Eddie, we'll do that. And look at what they did. They pretty much ruined the building. And if Arthur T. Brown were alive, he might even say you should have just torn the building down, because you defaced it so bad that it should just be destroyed. So I'm an advocate for preserving even the dumb buildings, but especially I'm for preserving. You could calling it an historic building or an Arthur T. Brown building or Frank Lloyd Wright building, that's just sort of scratching the surface. These buildings that have been around for decades and have been left outside in the rain and the sun have a patina that cannot be replicated. I mean, it's immediately nature starts to reclaim her materials. And if you're a good architect, your building will get better because nature is trying to reclaim it, as opposed to it gets worse, and therefore you have to have a maintenance budget to keep it new and shiny.
Right.
So that's why I want to preserve buildings, the good ones, because I'm in love with the natural, call it wonderful decay of building materials.
Yeah. Well, to shift gears, Eddie, and to kind of close out the interview, I'm wondering if you have any kind of personal reflections of Arthur T. Brown, the man, the kind of humanity that you've seen in him. And, every person I've talked to describes him as a gentleman, in that old fashioned kind of grounded in a core ethic of doing the right thing. And I'm wondering if you could share any kind of stories or insights other than what you've already said.
Well, I would definitely describe Arthur T. Brown as a gentleman. He was tall, thin, handsome, carried himself beautifully, spoke with intelligence. If anything, if I could talk to him again, I'd say, Arthur, you know, you're so much better than you give yourself credit for. You should speak to that as opposed to minimizing your accomplishments. And he did all day long when he was giving me a tour. He seemed to be minimizing his accomplishments. And he would say things like, you know, I put all the money in the back of the house because that's where people live, and then I economize on the front because, you know, it's not used that much. And I'm looking at this beautiful house from the street. I'm going, come on. I'm pretty sure you did care about the front of this house. But he tended to minimize things. And that may be how, you know, the behavior of a gentleman that was from an America that no longer exists.
Yep, yep, great. And also his sense of humor. I don't know if you experienced that. He just had this dry Midwestern sense of humor that would always sort of catch you off guard. And I really appreciated that about, you know, when I met him, and also just what other people have said. And was there any other, I know you told the story of the gas lines. Was there any other sort of funny anecdote that you can remember from your interview?
Yes, I think I asked him what made him want to be an architect. And with a straight face, he says, well, you know, I went to the enrollment office at the college, and I said, I'm interested in agriculture. And they thought I said architecture, and that's how I got to be an architect. And he didn't even crack a smile, which made it even funnier. So yes, he did have a very dry sense of humor, and he could deliver a punchline like no other architect I know. Good timing.
That's great. That's great. Well, Eddie, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and sharing your thoughts and you know, reflections on Arthur Brown, and greatly appreciate the love and also the advocacy for appreciating all of the architecture that's there, both in terms of the, you know, as you say, the sort of dumb buildings as well as the ones that are designed by architects. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, Brooks. And I wish I could have been there in person. My message to the audience is you're in for a treat tonight. And I, for one, am very happy that you're that interested in one of, you know, the pioneers of Arizona.
Great.
Thank you, Brooks.
Thank you.
So we're very lucky, and I want to apologize. We're going over our time, so there's no shame if you have to leave. But we have the third part of our program tonight is really about listening to some folks and talking about that legacy that was referred to with Eddie Jones. So it's my pleasure, in addition to Chris Evans, who will join us tonight, it's my pleasure to welcome Jennifer Levstik to the panel, as well as Henry Tom. And to start off, what I'd like to do is since we've already heard from Chris a little bit, I'd like to ask both Henry and Jen to introduce yourself, how you were introduced to Arthur Brown's work, and what you saw as sort of inspiration for that. So Jen, let's start with you.
All right. Do I need to do anything? All right, perfect. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I am Jennifer Levstik, and I am a historic preservation specialist and architectural historian with Westland Resources. So I have to say that probably my first introduction to Art Brown actually probably would have been through Chris and the opportunity to work with Chris on some other projects. But I really was able to sort of delve deep into the history and the architecture of Art Brown probably a little over a decade ago, I think, when I prepared a National Register nomination for a property he did off of Tanque Verde called the Woodrow Residence, which is actually a pretty unusual residence. It's one of the few adobes that he did. And had it not been for the archive that Gordon had, I probably would not have known it was an Art Brown property. And so just to reiterate how important it is that this archive is getting donated so that, you know, somebody like me who does National Register nominations has the opportunity to be able to understand the depth and breadth of the work of Art Brown. So as far as sort of, you know, some of the things that I appreciate about Art Brown through the research that I've done and also reiterated tonight through Chris's presentation is the adaptability of Brown, not just simply that he listened to his clients, but that he was also very aware of climate and site design. I think that's probably something all of us could appreciate, especially during the current political climate, is to think a little bit about adaptability.
Well,
Yep.
well, my first encounter with Art Brown's architecture was in 1982 when I first stepped foot on the University of Arizona campus. Kaiba Huachuca dorm. I didn't know it was Art Brown. I didn't even know what architecture really was. I just came to go to architecture school. So later on, I did figure out it was Art Brown's a building, and what was interesting about that building, it was the series of courtyards that were made to welcome people and students to that building. And then the orientation of the building also had the ribbon windows, and it also had some shade on it. So he was always very sensitive to where the buildings are located and what orientation and how to adapt that building to its environment. I currently live in Art Brown House. I didn't know that either until Chris Evans told me. And then I drive by Art Brown's office on Country Club to go to work. And then when I leave my office, I drive by the first Christian church that has, now I can't look at it because of what Eddie said. So, but my encounter with him is like daily, every day.
Great. Yep. And I know we're a little short on time, and I would like to have some Q&A, but I'd like each one of you to sort of talk about where you see the relevancy of Arthur Brown's work today, right? Not in a historic context, but what can we learn from it, and how, if there were students in the audience, what are the lessons to be learned from that then? And Chris, I'm going to ask you to go first on this one.
Well, I would say, I mean, certainly in an age where you know, the energy efficiency is so much more valued now than it was then. I mean, certainly his work and that idea of exploring that at a very sort of fundamental level, I think was clearly important and laid kind of the foundation for all the work that is done today. Yep. And so continuing that work, I think, is obviously fairly important. In general, I think his I mean, you know, I think what's kind of interesting is that his work, I mean, a lot of it could be done today. A lot of that work could be done today. You know, he uses a lot of brick, which you don't see much anymore. But other than that, you know, most of the solutions that he's coming up with could be thought of as reasonable solutions in our era as well.
Yeah. Jen, Tom, Henry?
Well, I don't know how to follow this, but I can certainly talk. Chris stole my answer. So it's a little difficult because certainly it is that engineering aspect, that climate conscious aspect of his work. I think that's really critically important. But I think some of it too was, certainly just like on a personal level, the fact that here was this really genuinely decent person who had a really long and prolific career, and everybody in town hired him. So, just to sort of get to that kind of level, it's really nice to sort of encourage those kinds of people in our world. And that's what I'm going to land on because Chris stole my answer.
Henry, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I've been carrying this document around all day today and just looking at it and having lunch with it. It's been sitting on my desk since Brooke has asked me to be on the panel. I'm going to read a couple things that I find pretty interesting, and it's not rocket science, but it's just so true. Good design is direct and simple without much eyewash. He has been an architecture of principle, responding to change, but resisting fad. So think about that, and if we all practice like that, we wouldn't have those dumb buildings.
Amen. I do want to open it up to the audience. We have a few minutes left. First of all, I'd just like to ask, raise your hand if you live in an Art Brown building or work in an Art Brown building. Amazing. How many of you knew Art Brown? Met him? Great. Okay. So are there any questions for any one of us up here on the panel? Raise your hand, ask the question, don't be shy. Yes, ma'am.
Chris, is that house that you showed us with the panel slider, whatever those are called, is that still?
You're talking about the window, the multi-panel sliding windows?
What's that called?
It's called the Goldsmith Residence. I'm not entirely sure it was up near on Ina, near Oracle, and I thought that I had seen that it was still in existence 15 years ago, but I was not able to find it again when I went looking for it here recently, and so I don't know if it's still there or not.
Okay. Yes.
The archive and the Benjamin Plumbing going to be open to more of the general public, similar to the archive at Special Collections for Jocelyn, or do you have to be some kind of expert or something to?
Yes, no, we're grateful for the Arizona Architectural Foundation for allowing us to house the drawings and Benjamin supply for the facility. Our goal is to transfer it ultimately to the UA Special Collections, where it will be publicly available. We're also hoping, again, this is a fundraiser, folks, and so we're raising funds in order for us to be able to process and make the collection more publicly accessible. Some of you know the Josser collection has been digitized, right? So we're moving toward these kinds of mediums that allow us to have access without having necessarily to go into archives, put on the white gloves, et cetera, but also to disseminate the significance of this. The thing that I always get blown away is we don't know about Arthur Brown. The students don't know about Arthur Brown. You know, people around the state or the country don't know about Arthur Brown. But as you could hear tonight, the significance was tremendous. The innovation was tremendous on the level of Neutra, on the level of Breuer, on the level of Frank Lloyd Wright. We need to get this information out here. So yes, to answer your question. Yeah.
I'll make a comment. We live in an Art Brown house. We didn't know who he was when we bought it, but it's been very pleasant. When he built it in '62, he had an air conditioner system on each end of the house, probably for efficiency, so you didn't have long, huge ducts everywhere. We actually took the air conditioners out and went back to evaporative cooling. The roof insulation is only 2 pieces of fiberboard, so it's not like it's got R40 on the roof or something. But we're actually able to live in the house using evaporative cooling, which we grew up with in Tucson.
Wow.
Nice.
Great. Yes, sir.
Other than his son, did he mentor any young architects who carried on his work?
That's a great question. Do you have an answer to that?
I don't have a good answer to that. One of the things that as we were trying to prepare this event, and had conversations with Gordon on trying to identify those people that worked in his office. And clearly, I mean, we know some people that worked in his office. Like I know Ann Rysdale worked for a time in his office, but we don't have really good information about that. There is some reference to. I can't remember if is there. I don't know if you guys remember. Is there reference to that in the book?
No, more with significant architects that worked on a lot of university buildings.
Okay.
I'm trying to find it because I was reading it at lunchtime.
But I think the short answer is no. We don't have great information. We're a little too far away now because the people who worked for him have also passed away. So I wish we had better information, and hopefully we'll have better information in the future. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Andy.
Can you speak to the contractors that he worked with and how they were sort of a part of being willing to do this experimental type of construction?
Well, one thing I could speak to, I don't know if anybody else wants to.
You got the mic.
Yeah. One thing I could say about that is that one of the things that I'm kind of struck by, and in this day, and particularly now in the time frame that we're in now, we have a real hard time getting people wanting to bid things at all, right? I mean, if the project isn't really large or have a real high dollar value, it's a challenge. He consistently had multiple bidders on almost all of his projects. They were never, like this project is going to be this builder. It was always multiple bidders, which means there were multiple people willing to take on those kinds of challenges at that time, which I think is really remarkable. That ambition to take on that kind of project, especially I look at something like that Tucson Chamber of Commerce, where you're building something that's totally new, and the architectural drawings, I think, maybe tell you have some guidance, but ultimately I think the contractor is going to have to work a lot of things out to make that actually happen.
Yes, Bob.
I have a question about the homes with the big glass windows. There was a bedroom with the bed, and there was all this glass, and I'm just wondering, what did they do about privacy? Did they landscape it so that nobody could get in, or did they have shades, or what? It just seems like, oh my gosh, I don't want everybody to see changing my clothes.
Well, in the Ball-Paylore House is a great example of that. There are curtains that go across on the inside. So, the photographs show the architecture and the way in which, when the curtains are open, the sun can come in. But there obviously was privacy. And then, as Chris mentioned, the whole ribbon windows that were high above were at a level so that you couldn't see any body parts above the head.
The other thing I would mention about that is I'm not sure exactly which house you're talking about, but kind of thinking maybe the Congdon residence, where that house and a number of those houses are built on large properties. So there's a lot of space around them, and so the issue of privacy is not nearly as big an issue.
Time for one more question. Yes?
So has there ever been another exhibition of his work in Tucson before?
Well, as a matter of fact, in 1985, there was an exhibit of Arthur Brown's work that was co-hosted by the Tucson Museum of Art and the College of Architecture. And it produced this exhibit catalog, which has become the source for much of the scholarship on Art Brown. It is available for sale. It is part of our fundraising efforts. It's $100, but it's going to a good cause. If you haven't already gotten a copy of it, please see that lovely woman in the back. Oh, going for $75. Wow. But we're actually down to our last 50 of these, right? And as much as I think there's been great interest to revive a monograph, right? A true monograph on Arthur Brown. This is the source, and it's because of a previous show done 1985, when Arthur Brown was still alive. Yeah.
How would you recommend that, obviously Arthur T. Brown has such an important legacy, but what would you recommend that the next few generations do to talk about his work and share this work with future generations?
Going through forums like this, right? And we need to disseminate this more carefully. One of the things that I've talked with these guys before about, we hear about the Arizona School, right, of architects. That generation, the Eddie Joneses and the Wendell Burnett's, they had precedents, and it was in people like Arthur Brown. And we need to tell that story as a continuum, not as a single generation that marked a style or a school of thought for Arizona. And so I think it's really up to us to disseminate that, bring it into the schools, making sure that we're talking about the principles that are appropriate for their time, but also the ones that are relevant for today. So that's the educator in me sort of speaking out.
I can add to that.
Here's the mic.
I told Brooke the story where why is Jostler so popular in Tucson? And it was because of publications. It was magazines with printed, and that became Tucson's architecture. But really, this is Tucson's architecture. So I told Brooks that this person wrote an article about Jostler, and we rebutted that. And of course, we never got published in our magazine again, us. But that's how we get it out. I mean, we need to promote it. I mean, and you don't ever see an article about Art Brown in any publication. So I think that's what we need to do.
Yep. All right, sounds good. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists, please. And finally, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting the Arizona Architecture Foundation and the archives that are here. Thank you for supporting Arthur Brown and dedicating efforts to advocate for it and preserve his buildings. Thank you. And please stay tuned to the Arizona Architectural Foundation website. There are plenty more events coming up. Stick around, and we need to sort of exit the building, but I'm sure we can gather on the outside of the building and talk a little bit more. Thank you again.